I'd like to start this episode by asking you, the listener, two questions. The first one is, do you think that your own life proves or disproves the maxim, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? Or to put that in a more philosophical way, maybe something like, we are shaped by the difficulties we have to struggle with. And that's the first thing I wanted to ask you. The second thing is, out of all the government policies of the countries you've lived in, which government policy do you think had the biggest impact on your life? Could be any policy, any rule. It's an interesting question, and Lord knows both of these questions and their answers could be extremely relevant to so many episodes in Chinese history, or the governance of China, to use a phrase that's also the title of a particular book. And the book we're looking at for this episode, More Than One Child by Shen Yang and translated by Nicky Harman, that's absolutely about both sort of the idea of what doesn't kill you makes you who you are, and a particular policy that had a huge impact on the entire world of more than one generation of people inside the People's Republic of China. And that is, as you may have guessed, the one-child policy. So yeah, it should be an interesting, possibly emotional episode depending on what affects you. I know this book had a big emotional effect on me. But before we get to talking with Nicky and Shen Yang, the guest for the episode, on this book, we're going to do the terrific news, the translated Chinese fiction news. What's going on? What's new in this world? So our first news item, it's about the Pen Translates Awards. Now this is not actually fresh news at all. This is from July the 2nd. So I'm a little late bringing this up, but I thought it's worth covering. So they announced on Thursday 8th of July the 11 countries and 11 languages that won the award. So there's 12 awards, but one country's a doubler, and that country is actually China, because there's 2 Chinese books in this list of 12, but one isn't. Well, whether or not it's Chinese, you could nitpick about that because it's translated from Tibetan, and it's by Christopher Peacock. He's the translator. Christopher Peacock is the translator, and the author is Tsering Yang. I may be mispronouncing that. I don't really know my Tibetan pronunciations at all. But that's Tsering, Tsering, and Yang, that's the part I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing right. That's Yangkye, and the book is Flowers of Laza. Again, not really sure how one is supposed to say Laza, if it's Laza or Laja, but Laza, yeah. The next one is Cocoon by Zhang Yueran, and that's translated from Chinese, just Chinese, to English by Jeremy Tiang, a former guest on the show. So yeah, we're very late here. We're literally months late, but congrats to the authors, congrats to the translators, and to the publishers. That is Balestier Press for Flowers of Laza? I'm going to say Laza, and World Editions for Cocoon. And actually, this is relevant to the book we're going to be talking about in today's episode, More Than One Child, because that was also published by Balestier, or Balestier, as I perhaps should be saying it. But yeah, whatever. There's our first news item. The second one, now this is much further afield from the world of professional publishing. This is output yet again from Dylan Levi King. Yet again, he's found his way into our news items. And it's something he's done for YouTube. I say that like YouTube commissioned him. Something he put on YouTube that's rather interesting. He's done a commentary track for a movie from 1988, a mainland Chinese movie called Obsession. And in Chinese, that name is 疯狂的代价. Did I get that right? 疯狂的代价, Obsession. So he sort of lays out what he's going to talk about in his commentary. He says, I talk about the movie industry and post-socialist cultural conservatism while watching Obsession, starring Zhang Rong, Li Jing, Wu Yuzhuan, and Xia Yuan. And he goes on to talk a little bit more about the plot of the movie. But yeah, that's an hour, 31 minutes, 47 seconds. So if you've got a free evening and you want to learn a bit about 80s China, or at least movies in 80s China, then there you go. There is a free resource for you, like all news items that will be linked to in the show notes. Now the third news item, this is up to date, much more up to date. This is a new book that's been announced coming out through Astor House, who were the publishers of Li Zhuan's Winter Pasture. And this book that they're bringing out is called Moonlight Rests on My Left Palm. It's by Yǐnxíng Xiǎohái and it's translated by Fiona Tse Lorraine. And this looks really interesting. This is something you might not expect to get translated into English, to be honest, but I'll just read you the blurb. I like to read blurbs. Here we go. Starting with the viral poem Crossing Half of China to Fuck You, Yu Xiaohua's raw collection in Fiona Tse Lorraine's translation chronicles her life as a disabled, divorced, single mother in rural China. So a lot of important words there. I'll keep going. Yu Xiaohua was born with cerebral palsy in the Hengdian village in the Hubei province. Don't know why they've got the there. Anyway, in Hubei province in central China. Unable to attend college, travel, or work the land with her parents, Yu remained home where she could help with housework. Eventually, she was forced into an arranged marriage that became abusive. She divorced her husband and moved back in with her parents, taking her son with her. In defiance of the stigma attached to her disability, her status as a divorced single mother, and as a peasant in rural China, Yu found her voice in poetry. Starting in the late 90s, her writing became a vehicle with which to explore and share her reflections on homesickness, family and ancestry, the reality of disability in the context of a body's urges and desires. Ooh, nice sentence. Let's keep going. Then Yu's poem, Crossing Half of China to Fuck You, blew open the doors on the patriarchal and traditionalist world of contemporary Chinese poetry. She became an internet sensation, finding a devoted following among young readers who enthusiastically welcomed her fresh, bold, confessional voice into the literary canon. Thematically organised, Yu's essays and poems are in conversation with each other around subjects that include love, nostalgia, mortality, the natural world, and writing itself. Woohoo! That's just great. Really nicely written blurb, and sounds really interesting too. So yeah, go check that out. Again, link to the publisher's page for that is on the show notes. I can see here it says it's going on sale in September 14th, so it's already open to pre-order. And I'm not doing this as a paid ad. I really should, but no, just because we're trying to promote the translated Chinese fiction out there, and that's how we do it. Okay, fourth news item. This is news about news. Maybe this is bad. Maybe I shouldn't do news about news, but fuck it. If we're gonna drop the F-bomb in news stories, then let's do it again. Fuck it. Let's cover this article written in the Publishers Weekly. So that's the US trade magazine, basically, for publishers. And sometimes there's interesting things in these. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's literally just for people following the business news in the trade. But here we have something of literary interest. We get to see which authors that Publishers Weekly decided to highlight. This is quite a long article. I won't read the whole thing, but let's just have a look at who they've decided to name. So we got Yu Hua. He's the guy who wrote To Live. So there's a big name in the sort of literary Chinese fiction, which has traveled in translation quite successfully. Yu Hua. Next, Mai Jia. So this is an interesting one because he's a genre fiction writer. He does like spy and decoding, what do you call them? Thrillers. Yeah, thrillers. And more in recent years, his books are getting translation published in English. So there's Mai Jia. Next, Chen Ran. I've never heard of Chen Ran. It says here she does daring portrayals of female experience in China in short stories, novels, and works of non-fiction. Cool. Okay, moving on. Xu Zichen. So he is the fellow who wrote Running Through Beijing, which is available in English. It says here he's the author of several novels about the underbelly of contemporary urban life in China's largest cities. Bingo. Sounds really cool. Shen Keyi. Now, we talked about Shen Keyi a fair bit in the episode on Beijing Coma, because she's got a book out in English translation, I believe, called Death Fugue, which is along maybe similar lines to Beijing Coma, but a little bit more speculative or weird. We like the weird here on Trachufik. And she also recently followed me on, it's either Instagram or Twitter. So if you're listening, Shen Keyi, hi, ni hao. Okay, next one. This is the last one covered in the article. Liu Zhenyun. I have not heard of Liu Zhenyun. So it says here, he was an award-winning short fiction writer and novelist. He explores the clash between tradition and contemporary Chinese culture. Very nice. So this article is up there to read. Aha, I can see at the bottom. It's sponsored by, how would you pronounce this? Xianpiek, the Chinese National Publications Import-Export Group. So there you go. That's why Publishers Weekly published this thing. It's because it's some promo for Chinese authors. So that's cool, actually. And it's maybe encouraging that the Import-Export Group included or gave the approval stamp on perhaps 生可以, because Death Fugue, I would imagine that's not getting published in China. That's unpublishable because of what the content it deals with. So it's good that soft, ads effectively, or soft power, or whatever you want to call it, the Chinese publishing group is using, is not blotting out all authors who might be blotted out in the mainland. That's nice. Hopefully that little window won't be shut out. Hopefully no one goes back and edits 生可以 out of that article. I would assume that wouldn't happen, but life is full of unpleasant surprises. Right, that's the end of the terrific news. So without further delay, let's get on to the interview that I had with author Shen Yang and translator Nicky Harman. So on the show, we have Shen Yang and Nicky Harman. So hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi, Angus. Hi, Nicky.
Hi.
Yeah, another freeway episode. Always fun. So I'll ask you both, how's it going? What have you both been up to? And just to keep things simple, Shen Yang, you can go first.
Yeah. Hi, Angus. Hi, Nicky. Hi, everyone. For me, promoting the book was definitely the top priority in the past few weeks. It was really challenging new adventure. I had a lot of fun. And in the meantime, I'm cooperating with an artist from Shanghai to illustrate my next book, a children's book. And Nicky, you know her, the artist. We bought the paintings there.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Do you want to give the artist a shout out on the show?
It will be a collection of stories and adventures from my childhood, but without any mention of the policy. And the focus is to show new generation how we used to live and play as kids in my times through traditional Chinese folk art illustrations. Yeah, and her name is Chen Huifang.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you mentioned there a book and a policy. So we should probably mention that right off the bat. The book for the episode is More Than One Child. Shen Yang is the author, Nicky's the translator. And the policy you mentioned is the one child policy. I'm sure if our listeners haven't heard of that, I wonder where they've been all their lives. But before we keep going on with the book, Nicky, how is it going at your end and what have you been up to?
Yes. Hi, Angus. Hi, Shen Yang. I'm delighted to be here. I've been really busy translating. I translate fiction and non-fiction. So Shen Yang's memoir was the last non-fiction book I translated, and I'm currently translating a Jia Pinghua novel. And I've been pretty busy. When I'm not doing that, I work on Paper Republic. If I may give it a shout out, that's paper-republic.org. And that's a registered nonprofit promoting Chinese literature in translation. And there's always loads to do. We all work as volunteers, and there's always lots to do there. Plus, summer schools teaching translation. And the only thing missing from my life is a visit to China, because I haven't been able to go to China since pre-COVID, obviously. So very much looking forward to my next visit.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's been sort of a relief for me because a little part of me has always wanted to go back, but I've been able to think, at least right now, I can, that little worry or that little nagging thought can switch off. I guess listeners who've been religiously listening to this show might be thinking, wait, this is deja vu, what's going on? Nicky's a return guest to the show. We were last here to talk about another Balestier Press book, actually, Yang Ge's The Chili Bean Paste Clan. So it's great to have you back on, Nicky.
Yeah.
So keeping things moving, let's talk about the book that we're doing for this episode, Shen Yang's More Than One Child. I'd like to start by talking about the early years, or the early phase in the book's development, which is appropriate because the book's a memoir pretty much about childhood. So there's a really nice sort of, I don't know if you call it an intro, but the opening of the book sort of deals with, you could say it's a little bit like in a PhD, a literature review. Shen Yang, you go into a little bit about how there's not a lot of other books on this topic of excess children and the one-child policy. So just first, let's clear up what do we mean if we say excess children, excess child? Yang, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think during the strict one-child policy era, couples were limited to have a single child. Any further babies were considered illegal, and those illegals were born without permission and without household registration, were called 小黑孩, 黑孩子, excess birth children. And as of today, in my family household registration, my name is still missing.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're one of them. So getting to the main question I was hoping to ask here, are there other books on this topic?
There is one, Caroline Kahn, she wrote Under the Red Skies, but it's not mainly focused on excess birth children. And she had a very happy childhood to me. And then, the focus was not on excess birth children.
Right. And so with this book, what were you hoping to contribute to the topic?
We always say the fact you can't see doesn't mean it does not exist. So by writing about the book, the story of excess children, our invisible generation, I want to record that unique part of history to let other people know how that one single rule affected our lives, the difficulties we faced and how we lived. And I want to let the other excess children know that they are not alone. We have each other. We are a big family. And hopefully more and more excess birth children will jump out bravely and tell their stories to the world.
I think that's a great thing to do for readers outside China, because although one might think, oh, this is one part of modern China that is maybe in the global consciousness. I certainly knew about the one-child policy when I was tiny. I think my parents happened to mention it to me whenever I would say, look, if there's a huge world population problem, why doesn't the government do something about it? And they say, well, there is a part of the world where it's a thing and it has all sorts of consequences and it's not as simple as you might think.
Can I add to that? One thing that really struck me when Shen Yang and I did the Balestier Book Club launch event a couple of weeks ago, that's also on YouTube, the Balestier Press one. Actually, a couple of people who were listening from China popped up and said, this was my experience. This was the experience of my family, my cousin. And so exactly what Shen Yang said, it's brought people out into the open, and some really heartbreaking stories about just how difficult your lives have been.
Yeah.
Totally. Finishing off what I was saying there, I think what I was thinking is that although there is maybe outside China, there's a popular understanding of a policy which is just you're not allowed more than one kid. There's not a deeper understanding of the nuances and the effects, and one of those effects and nuances is stories of people like yourselves, Yang. It's unless you have someone telling you their story, there's probably no way you could really think through how the effects of the policy would play out in real people's lives. So it's a really important as well as interesting book for sure. I wanted to ask you how it came about. What was its origins? Because this is a translated book, as we mentioned, published by Balestier Press. I've got a physical copy in my hands. Listeners won't be able to see it, but I'm holding it in front of the camera. There it is.
Oh, lucky you. I didn't even have one.
Yeah. It's a lovely package with color photos at the back as well. So listeners, go get yourself, pre-order yourselves one, or if you're listening in the future, go buy one. But how did we get here? What's the story that led up to the publication of the book? Does anyone want to answer this one? I guess Yang, you should maybe answer first since you wrote the thing.
Well, that's a long journey. Let's say like this: Monkey King has his journey to the West. Well, publishing this book has been my journey to the West. Along the way, there were many difficulties, even if my book is essentially a story of a little girl's sorrow and adventures during the one-child policy era. Not even one publishing company in China dared to publish it for obvious reasons. So after countless rejections, I decided to change strategy and publish in the West. But the thing is, back then, I didn't know anyone who could help me to translate the story into English. And I didn't have any connections. And to make things worse, I wasn't on any social media. But all these didn't defeat me. I was trained to be a 厚脸皮, anyway, the thick skin face brat. so I did a thorough research and harassed many writers and translators, publishers on the internet. 95% ignored me. Only 5% kindly replied to me, even though none of them could help me in the end. I'm still very grateful for their kind words and encouragement. Like I've mentioned, I'm not a social person, and most of the time I just stay quietly at home, read and write by myself. But when good things are supposed to happen, they will happen no matter what. I call it a serendipity. So one day, out of blue, I accompanied my husband to one event related to sustainability in design. And there I met a young woman who, after discovering that I wrote a story about the excess children, immediately connected me with her friend, Rosanne Lake, who back then had just published her book, Leftover in China. Then one thing led to another. Once we got to know each other, Rosanne introduced me to Xinran. Then Xinran connected me with Nicky, and that's where all the magic happened.
Amazing. I'm glad Shinran has appeared in the story. That's excellent.
So shall I take over from there?
That would be great, yeah.
Shinran, I was looking up before we started this podcast, and it was in April last year that Shinran contacted me. And in case anyone is interested in her books and doesn't know her name, it's Xinran, all one word. Anyway, she's a lovely woman, lives in London. She wrote to me and said, I'm introducing my good friend who's got a really good book. Take it away. So Shen Yang and I talked to each other on email, and long story short, I translated a sample for her. I really liked the book. I really liked the style. I thought it was very lively and very accessible and very vivid. So in the end, I translated the whole book, and Shen Yang and I discussed how we were going to find a publisher or an agent. And in the end, the publisher came first, so she didn't need an agent. And it was Balestier Press, who are a very small publisher, but have a very good reputation of publishing excellent books translated from Chinese. And here we are now, all doing our best to promote it. And it's about to come out.
Yeah, and what you said there about the book being lively, readable, engaging, and so on, I totally agree. I think so. Like on one hand, it's great that Yang, you chose to write on your own life framed through this really important angle, but it would have been a tragedy if it was not readable. But you're a great writer, so it's a great book on those two fronts.
Thank you, and I got a great translator.
Right, that helps too. I'm just going to take off my jumper, which is going to involve taking off my headphones. Bear with me here.
Okay.
Totally overheating.
Oh, it's too hot.
Yeah, I think I might as well take off my jacket too. I've done the decorative bit. Take it off now. You've seen my nice jacket.
I'm upstairs in my new house, and I think we have water pipes here that don't have very good insulation, so they sort of work as free heating upstairs.
Oh,
it's
wow.
always hot here.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's not great. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the past of the book. When it comes to talking about the contents of the book, I think we're going to be talking about the past a lot too. Something listeners maybe don't know is for every one of these interviews, I write a sheet of questions which have headings. So the headings are invisible. Just because I never talk about them on the show doesn't mean that they haven't always been there. And the heading for this section, rather than calling it questions about the contents of the book, I've called it family, memory, history. And the first section, history, here's my question. So it's very easy to find English language or translated to English books about hard times, difficult stuff in China, maybe often topics that, like you said, Yang, you are just not going to find a publisher in China because they're on topics that are taboo. But to me, this didn't really feel like it didn't feel like it fit in that category because there was a lot about human lives, one person's childhood, rather than, zoomed out big historical or even political questions. So I wanted to ask you, Yang, when you were writing the book, did you have either angle in mind, either I must cover this weighty topic as best I can, or were you completely the other side of the spectrum, thinking I must give a really true portrait of my childhood? Or was it a fusion of the two, or were you thinking about something quite different? And also, once you've answered, maybe I could ask you, Nicky, what were your thoughts going into the book, and were they different coming out the other end?
Okay, yes, exactly. Like you said, it's very easy to find English language or translated books about hard times in China. But for me, the intention was never to depict the hard times for the sake of the hard times. I think history is not just made by big events and famous characters, but also by ordinary people. It's a collection of all people's experiences and feelings. And I believe everyone's story is unique, and everyone can be an author and contribute to record the history with their own experience. Actually, when Vincent Ni from the Guardian interviewed me, we had a small discussion about this. He said that people actually are far more interested in reading about Chinese day-to-day life under the one-child policy period, rather than diving into political history or policy analysis. And I totally agree with him. Because in China, it's almost like for each generation, there is one policy, and these policies can forever change one's life. It's like a circle, all connected. Because of the policy, I had a turbulent childhood. And because of my turbulent childhood, I could write about it. And by writing about it, I contributed in my own way to record that part of history. I guess small fry matters. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the big picture is just made up of all the small parts put together, I guess. But sometimes there's a stamp of the bigger picture built into the small part. It can be very interesting how these things interact. I have a follow-up question, actually, before we go to you, Nicky. I want to ask, what's the time window of the book? Because I know it's sort of the 80s into the 90s. Do you have, off the top of your head, the exact years that the story covers?
What do you mean? Well, the story, when will the story happen, right?
Well, it finishes when you're roughly maybe 18, is that right?
Yeah.
And what year were you born?
1986, January the 1st.
Okay, so do some maths here. So do we finish in
2006, around 2006. Yeah, I went to university at 2006. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting time in modern China. And I mentioned the photos at the end of the book earlier. You can sort it. I mean, maybe this is just me floating my own ideas, but that was a time of huge amounts of change in China, beyond just the one-child policy. Yeah. And that period in the 80s and 90s, you can sort of see the afterglow of the older period in China, like the 70s, the Cultural Revolution, and maybe even earlier. And that those historical after effects are totally in the book, affecting some characters. We might talk more about that later, but you can also sort of see the trajectory, like how things are going. And it's something, as a reader, I found interesting beyond just looking at the characters. The way the characters interact with the background setting was interesting for me, because I never grew up in that period, obviously. And when the China I lived in was the China that came later in the 21st century. So I don't really have a question there, but I just thought that was an interesting thing about the book that wouldn't have come out if we were only talking about the big picture.
Yeah.
I think one of the really interesting things is that for the adults, when you were a kid, for the adults, the Cultural Revolution was very fresh in their memory. And there is an anecdote where you're sitting outside listening to the grown-ups, the quite old grown-ups, who are talking about what life was like during the Cultural Revolution. And it's fascinating to see these little glimpses, which are very personal, but they're very vivid recent history.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could keep talking about that, but I should ask you, Nicky, what were your thoughts or expectations before you opened up the book, and how much had they been confirmed or surprised by the time you'd put the book down at the end?
Right. Well, so I opened the file, and I was a blank sheet as far as my impressions went. I had no preconceptions. I had no idea. And I read the first bit, which, as you say, sets the memoir in a historical context. And then immediately I was plunged into this world of a baby, a small child, a bigger child, a teenager, growing up and being abandoned, being taken on again, being treated quite badly, but ultimately coming out at the other end as a very rounded, mature, and forgiving young grown up. And I think that was what really impressed me. I mean, memoirs, the good thing about memoirs is that they show you history through a single person and their families' lives. And that's what I loved, all the details. That was what it was like being in the countryside, being in a small town at that time. But also that was what it was like having parents who were very physically distant and in the end quite emotionally distant as well. And then uncle and aunt who'd adopted you and for their own reasons treated you quite badly. Yeah. So there was an emotional picture as well as just a picture of what it was like in the countryside. And I think that emotional picture is what we all need if we're reading about China. This is what it means to be a young Chinese woman.
I'd echo what you're saying about what a Western reader sort of needs if they want to understand the country through a book. The component that this book has is the rural or the small town settings. Not everything is happening in Shanghai or Beijing or even somewhere like, I don't know, a second tier city. A lot of the book is happening in the countryside, but it's not an epic tale of the history of the countryside. It's about life there, about real people captured really vividly. So that was something I enjoyed, which I'd only seen in like maybe one other piece of nonfiction, but it was a totally different story. So yeah, I really liked that side of things too.
One of the anecdotes that I found most touching and most vivid was when this small boy who is your friend drowns, because there is a lot of water around there, and it is, I'm sure that I've read in other books as well, drownings do happen. And anyway, so he's the single son of the family and the single child of the family, after which his mother goes almost crazed with grief and is then abandoned by her husband and thrown out of the house. And a very kind neighbor allows her to live in a straw stack. That is a haystack, which is made of straw, and that is where she makes her home. And she may have matted hair and behave in a way which is quite crazy, but you still see her. You see her on your way to school, on your way home.
Yeah.
And it's really deeply moving.
Thank you. Actually, that's the story of her. What happened to her later on is a tragedy. It's like Yuhua's 活着 in real life. I'll share. Do you want me share with you guys right now or later as a side thing?
Oh no, you could go for it if you're happy with it going on to the podcast.
Okay, if I'm not spoiling it. Actually, she later on she got married with another man who is the one who's 骑三轮车的 cycles on the tricycle and carries goods for others, a very poor man. And she delivered another baby boy. But sometimes she has mental problems, sometimes she doesn't. One time she even snatched 100 RMB from my aunt when she was trying to buy stuff from the market. And my aunt didn't get it back from her because she thought, this poor woman, poor life, let her just have this 100 RMB to buy whatever she needs. And then, occasionally the husband abused her also. This woman is really, her life is, full of tragedy. And then the boy grew up around 16 years old. And then she had this breast cancer. And 2 years later, she died. And the boy cried like really, really touching the scene. My aunt saw the whole scene. She described to me. It was really touching. She even cried because the boy was like devastated. The mom who loved him, passed away, and she had a really horrible life. And then 1 year later, the boy was also murdered in Guangzhou. And then the man sold the house and left our village. So when my aunt told me the following story, I was like, oh my God, this is like Yuhua's 活着 in daily life. It's just so near you. And I don't know, whenever I thought about Wang Jixia, I just feel so sad for her. It's really, it's really sad.
Yeah.
That's translated as to live. Yuhua's book.
Right.
To live. Right. Yeah. It was really touching.
There was a thing, Nicky, you mentioned about how yourself, Yang, the narrator, starts off as a troubled kid, but we see your personality developing into a very sort of mature, reflective, articulate person. And on one hand, I guess in any memoir, you kind of expect that because this person is going to grow up to be good enough at articulating themselves to write a good enough memoir to get published. So I feel in a lot of memoirs I've read that sort of happens. You realize you're dealing with someone who's probably very smart and a fairly clear thinker, but is also driven to express themselves. And I totally felt that reading the book, that through all the ups and the downs, we had a kid who was pretty reflective. And I guess we've only got a few minutes before we have to jump into the next Zoom meeting. Do you think the things that you went through helped you become the writer that you are? Or do you
definitely
think right?
I didn't need to, writing about more than one child, I really didn't need to dig deep into my mind. All the memories, good or bad, happen or sad, they just chose to stay in my brain by themselves. And I happen to be born into a family where almost everyone has a very good memory, especially my grandma, Nana, or the Lao. In the book, I already mentioned that when I went back to Jining the very first time, in order to win back my affection, Nana kept bombing me with my childhood stories, which really annoyed me back then because I was too young, too naive to understand her love. And then in high school, when I was already officially back home, whenever Nana missed my youngest sister, Star, and me, she would wake up at 4 a.m, hop onto her tiny, cute tricycle and cycled for over 3 hours all the way from the village Sunjia to Jining. Then in the evening, she would snuggle together with me and Star on the big bed, like the good old times. Just I don't hug her tiny feet anymore. And that's when bedtime childhood story happens. She would go on and on without stopping. I was like, hey, Lao, Nana, time to sleep. But she was so into her own beautiful memory that she totally ignored me. Then my sister would say, just go to sleep with the sound of Nana. So you see, somehow Nana helped me a lot to strengthen my own memory about my childhood, even when I was sleeping. and then as I grown up, whenever I went to visit Nana and Granddad in Sunjia village, all the relatives, and the villagers, some of the villagers, they would, tell me stories of me as a child and how naughty I used to be. And somehow they also helped me to enrich the story. Polish the story with more details. So all these things strengthened my memory. And so I just need to sit down and write everything down. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I have a follow-up question for you from that last one, Yang. So you mentioned that you didn't need to do too much digging into your own memories. You had a lot of sort of oral help from all these people from your past telling you the stories. I wanted to ask if you had help from any other media as well as just people telling you in person, because we mentioned before there's pictures at the back of the book. So I was wondering if digging up any old photos or other records, like anything in writing, was part of your process of putting the book together.
The photos sure helped a lot because, you know, I'm not a computer, I cannot remember everything. But I think some people, I don't know, some people are just born to have a very good memory, and some people just choose not to remember some stuff. But I wish I were this kind of people who don't remember, who cannot remember the past or anything happened, or cannot be affected by this kind of small things happening in the past. But I don't know, I just happen to remember everything. So it's really difficult. It's good when it comes to writing, but in daily life, it's really hard because sometimes this can be it can affect your life because, you know, especially something bad like the childhood trauma.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me that your memories of this period are so good. I had a not really comparable at all, but I had a period in my childhood that was what can I say, more difficult than other parts of my childhood, where my parents divorced, and there was a period where things were a little bit a lot of confusing things happened before everything sort of normalized into something new that was day to day normal and happy for a kid, and I guess for my parents too. And I have very clear memories of all the different sort of episodes in that period. But I got a big surprise, I think several years ago now. I mentioned to my mom, you know, those were some crazy years. How long was that exactly? And she's like, years, what are you talking about? That was like 1 year total. And I found that because I had so many memories crammed in there in so much detail, that maybe in my mind, that felt like much longer than it really was. So, do you feel that your really good memory covers your whole life, or do you think your memory is especially good here when you were going through this sort of rough or difficult time?
You know, I read something from one article the other day. It says you need to have a tragic, dramatic, hard childhood to be a writer, because these things really impress you. It's like carved on your brain. You cannot, you know, it's not easy to get rid of. So like, let's say most of the writers, George Orwell,
George Orwell.
Yeah, he also had a very hard childhood also. So I guess, you know, this also helped to, I don't know, I think this also contribute to the fact that I'm gonna write about this.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The childhood of authors. I'm reading a book by Stephen King right now, who, you know, he's famous for writing lots of horrifying, disturbing stories, a lot of which involve children or adults who are being revisited by stuff from their childhood. And yet whenever he's asked, he said he had a pretty normal childhood. But then that makes us wonder, do we believe him? But that's a little bit beside the point. So I'll just go into the next question. Unless, Nicky, you want to say anything here about this point about memory.
Not so much about memory. I mean, about the emotional impact of those memories, I think. I think one of the things that struck me very much at the end of the book was that your uncle, who, after all, your uncle and aunt have been pretty rough and abusive characters, and both of them, in the end, you come to an understanding about how they ended up like that. But your uncle also writes you a most moving letter in which he says that I know we didn't treat you right, but believe me, we're now so proud of you. And it's much longer than that. And it's utterly convincing. And I thought that was one of the most beautiful bits of the book.
Yeah, I cried a lot when I read that, because it's like, wow, finally. I waited this for like almost more than 20 years. And yeah.
Yeah, the end of the book is amazing.
Thank you. I think, Nicky, since me and Angus, we all had this hard childhood and we remember a lot of stuff. What about you? What about your childhood? I think you have a happy childhood. Do you remember stuff from your childhood?
I have a terrible memory.
Okay.
I should say, outside of that difficult window, my childhood was pretty good. Not perfect, but whose is. I had tough times as a teenager, but those were mostly self-inflicted. That's probably pretty common among teenage boys.
Yeah, no one had a perfect childhood. Yeah, no one had a perfect childhood anyway.
Yeah.
There's always something.
Yeah. I've got another question about memory. This one's a little bit more philosophical, I suppose, and I guess either of you could answer. So we talked there about memories, just without thinking about what is a memory. And I think memories in a way can be multimedia, just like books, pictures are multimedia, because you can visually try and remember a scene, or you could try and recall the emotions and like what medium, what an emotion is even made of. Like, who knows? No one really knows that. So I guess this would apply to the author and the translator. And maybe there's not really a good way to give it a concrete answer, but what did you have to do to sort of faithfully or powerfully recreate either like the feelings, the visual settings, or the emotional feelings, or the memories of people, recreating people how they were in the past, only using words? Was that a big challenge, either Yang for yourself or Nicky translating it into another language, but keeping those memories in word form?
Shall I say a bit about the translation here?
Sure. Yeah.
So yes, I suppose if I think back at the book, one of the strongest memories, and of course it's a pseudo memory for me because I was never there, is the food, and this wonderful food, which is a date cake, and this was. But yeah, I was trying to find it on a bit of paper. Oh, a bit of paper is under here. Yes, yeah, the huagao, the flour cake, which of course is a complete misnomer for an English reader, because it's nothing to do with flowers, and a cake to us is something you put in an oven. And actually, this particular kind of date cake is the dough is steamed, and it's got red dates inside, but they're not the desert dates that we're familiar with. They're a completely different kind of date. They probably should have a completely different name in English. So date is misleading, cake is misleading, but okay, bear with me. So I got lots of nice pictures, and I looked at them. I thought, oh, I really want to eat these huagao, and it was so much part of your childhood. So there were other words as well, which really kind of made big, vivid memories for me. And they were the names that you called to each other. Like your aunt and uncle called you by a whole lot of really abusive, horrible names, of which the most common was Senize, which I thought, well, how on earth am I going to translate that? And because I'm translating into British English, I don't have to worry about American English. So we went for brat, because brat is very British. And then the S was damn brat. So you were, as you said, your aunt called you damn brat so often, so loudly, that the whole village actually thought that your real name was damn brat.
Yeah.
Yang. So damn brat recurs on just about every page because she's always yelling at you. But then you also had quite fun calling her by a nickname or her voice anyway, because she was your dagu, she was your father's elder sister. And she had a voice that was so loud that everyone all around the village could hear her voice whenever she yelled for you. And her surname was Shen, like yours. So her voice then is the Shen bellow, because she's bellowing around the village. So she's got the Shen bellow. I hate to think, does she actually know she's been called the Shen bellow in English? That slightly worries me. So nicknames and food, they all create memories.
We had taste and we had sound. And you're so true. Nicky, I've noticed before in stories of yours I've read that the translations of foods names is always seems quite thoughtful and yet also seamless reading. And I know it's good because it's stuck in my memory. Yeah, the date cakes and the street food that Yang you'd eat going to and from, or would want to eat sometimes, watching other kids eating, going to and from school. I remember there was meat buns. I guess some kind of baozi would be my guess. It's just a meat bun in English in the book. And there's hot and sour soup, so maybe like swen la tang or something.
Yeah, hu la tang.
Okay.
It's very famous in Henan province.
Right.
Hu la tang.
Can you? What's in there?
Ooh, it's a shitload of stuff. Sorry.
It would be pepper. Has it got hujiao?
Yeah. Hujiao, hujiao. Yeah.
Right.
Beef. I think there's a description of this in the book.
Oh yeah.
And then Nicky translated that. Yeah. The key ingredient is the herbal stuff. There are herbal stuff in there. Yeah, that's what made it so special. And there's also one article writing about this hula tang. And every time I went back to Nanyang, the first thing you get out of the train station is to directly go there. One time, there's only I took a tricycle, electronic tricycle instead of a taxi, and I told the guy, "Hey, let's go to number 12 middle school. There's this hula tang place. I treat you. Let's have breakfast together." So he drove me there. He stopped there, and I treated him for hula tang and the bean. And then after we had breakfast together, and then he drove me back to Dagu's home. So it's really interesting.
Brilliant. I'm glad we're talking about taste as a way to get to memories. This reminds me of something I saw as a kid on TV. There was the BBC, British Broadcasting Company, did this really good series, or a couple of series maybe, on like human instincts with this professor. I think his name was Robert Winston. I'm going to Google that right now. Yeah, he looks exactly like you'd think like a scientist would. He's got a mustache, often wears a bow tie and glasses. So he was a presenter on these shows about human instincts. And there was one on memories. And they had a group of people of various ages who they would do sort of experiments on to show you the unexpected and interesting ways memory can work. And one amazing thing he did was, he said, scientists have learned that taste and our senses are a strong way of triggering deep memories that we don't normally have access to. And the way they showed this, they got some of the older participants on the show. So this was my childhood, so like the 2000s, and they got some people who would have been kids during World War II in Britain. So although there were no ground battles in Britain at that time, there were air battles. It's a dangerous place. So kids were often moved to different homes or living in very scary circumstances. And there was food rationing. So if they weren't rich, I suppose, they might be on quite simple foods. So what they did for the experiment was they got the exact same porridge oats that were either commonly eaten or were part of the rations. So the porridge that like all the working class and maybe middle class kids too would be eating. And they knew that at least one guy in their group had grown up eating this stuff. So they put him in a room with like no pictures, no sound, no other influences, just gave him a bowl of the porridge, didn't tell him what it was or anything. And I think they had a camera so you, the viewer, could see if he reacted. And sure enough, he starts to eat the porridge, and you can see he's struggling with some thought. And then he starts to sort of quietly cry because it's triggering those deep memories. And this, I am going somewhere with this. I mean, I'm going to get back to the book.
Can I say
go
one
on,
last
go on.
thing?
Yeah.
Sorry. Talking about this, you should have you guys ever watched Li An's movie 喜宴? 喜宴. It's very famous and it's one of his best, better than Life of Pi, whatever that. 喜宴is his masterpiece. Yeah.
I think it's called Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. Is it all?
Oh yeah. 喜宴. 饮食男女.
That's Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. Eat,
Oh
Drink,
yeah,
Man, Woman.
yeah. You watched that?
Yeah.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Loved it.
1994, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of food there, and it's related to what you were talking about. You should watch that definitely.
Okay, thanks for the recommendation. So I was going about it in a very roundabout way, but I was hoping to say like really deep emotions and triggers in the book about related to going into the past. So I wanted to read a segment of the book that was maybe my favorite segment, that it attacked me from two angles. One was it's near the end of the book, and it draws an amazing it's an amazing bow tying together all the emotional journey that you yourself, the narrator, has gone through. But it's you're making sort of general statements about what it's like going back to your childhood, that anyone who had a childhood, never mind a bad or tricky childhood, it's going to speak to them. So I'll stop talking about it and start reading it. Here we go. I had not realized until that point, nor did I want to admit, how important a role my childhood still played in my adult life. I stubbornly persisted in believing that I was who I was because that was what I wanted to be. I was such a prickly hedgehog that I was hurting other people and myself. I could not see who I was until I pulled out each spine one by one. And this is the sentence I really like here. It is a long and painful process to see oneself clearly, as is the process of returning to one's childhood. That's just brilliant. I know there's a common anecdote from the beginnings of Western philosophy, Greek philosophy, and it's the words written above, the shrine of the Oracle of Delphi, this important figure. And the words are, know thyself. And those are, from that point of view, the most important thing you can ever be told, that you should know yourself. And yeah, it's probably impossible to do that unless you go back to your past in some way and face it. And it spoke to me so much. It was like the guy eating the porridge. I was getting flashbacks and feeling very strongly affected. So yeah, I'm kudos to both of you for putting that translated text together.
Thank you. That was really beautifully translated, and it's really touching.
Oh, it's because the original was beautiful and touching.
Thank you. And it triggered Angus' memory. I think it's because you had that, when your parents divorced, and you also have this self-discovery about yourself, So I think, and also you mentioned you had a troubled teenage life. So I think
not worse, maybe not worse than any other teenager, but I guess that doesn't mean it's not difficult.
Yeah. The process of self-discovering is really difficult. Or many times I was crying by myself in the room, and sometimes even in front of my husband. But luckily I managed to go through that. That's how you say that tunnel.
Yeah, a tunnel is a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Even if it's a tunnel towards your future self, or a tunnel back into your past, but in fact it's underground. You have to go through things beneath the surface of your skin, internally, and then come out the other end back into reality. I think that's very true. I was probably just going to go on to talk more about the translation, but would either of you like to say more about the emotional side of the book, like bits that have really affected you very strongly? Maybe Nicky, as someone who was a reader of the book and not just a writer, did any parts really hit you?
Mm. Yeah, I think you can go back to the bit I said about the uncle, the reconciliation, Shen Yang reconciling with that uncle, because I thought that actually has such a big impact. I mean, we're all familiar with the term misery memoir, and there are plenty of misery memoirs about China, but one which can come up at the end with a kind of positive ending, just like in the excerpt that you just read, it is very empowering. And so it was your uncle's letter to you at the end, which seemed to kind of sum up the kind of reconciliation that you'd come to, at least with him.
Yeah.
That moved me a lot too.
Should I talk about the one affected? I found most affecting.
Totally, yeah.
Okay, and I think there are two parts I find most affecting. One is about my friend Liu Yangguang, the conversation we had in the classroom. I still, in a family where verbal abuse was the norm, the conversation with my childhood friend Liu Yangguang in the classroom is definitely one of the most affecting parts for me. Even what he said was really touching and warm back then. In fact, even until today, I can still vividly remember that every detail of that lovely afternoon. It was really touching because someone who noticed your emotion and came over to talk to you, to comfort you. And another most affecting part is when Nana was trying all the means to win back my affection many years after she left my aunt to take me away. I was full of resentment and too young to understand the whole situation well. And I was dodging her all the time, as you can read in the book. And actually, when I was writing that part, I couldn't help myself crying because by reliving those memories, traveling back to times, I realized that, back then she must have felt heartbroken. The kid you raised dodging you, doesn't want to talk to you, or so. I found that is very affecting.
Yeah, I think I found, so I mentioned that little rough patch in my childhood. As a teenager, I revisited that many, many times, maybe too many times, and also as a young adult, but often just revisiting it through my own eyes. And now as someone who's trying to be a real adult, get a job, get a house, and so on, there are practicalities that are making it much more easy, making it me much more able to see things through the eyes of my parents or other people who have some kind of, in quotes, part in that story. And it totally changes how I see the events because, they've got their own, it's a dramatic story, not just for myself and my sibling, but for everyone involved. And yeah, it's one thing. We're all trained to see things from other people's point of view in the present. That's easy enough, but it's another thing doing it back in time. It's it certainly wasn't something I did when I was younger. But I want to keep us moving here to talk about the translation a little bit more. Okay. So we went through a few interesting words already. Nicky mentioned some of them. I know you've got some more. I'd love to hear about those. And also, I'd be interested to know if the two of you had to collaborate much on figuring out any tricky points, because the last time Nicky was on the show, we were talking about, I think, basically figuring out all the swearing, be it in Mandarin or Sichuanese, from Woman Jia, Chili Bean Paste Clan by Yang. So I was just wondering if there's a similar story this time in a translator-author collaboration, or if it was a little different this time around for yourself, Nicky.
I think it was quite similar, and I felt I was really lucky to have Shen Yang give me a really close read through, because there were a few bits of dialect, and it was quite important to me to know that I'd done it right, and also to have your confirmation that I'd got the right tone. After all, I'd given you a completely different voice, and giving someone a voice is quite difficult, and usually it's not a memoir. Usually I'm translating fiction. But here it was your voice in Chinese, and I've suddenly reinvented you in English. So I was very pleased that you were able to confirm that it was okay as far as you were concerned. And you reassured me. There was another really interesting challenge, is that with and this is what you could call the sociological or the political vocabulary. Shen Yang is describing a situation for which we have no direct parallels in Britain, America, Western Europe on the whole. So you've got a whole new social situation. And so there's a whole new terminology for it, which means that when you're translating these special words which describe special people in a particular situation, there is no obvious translation. And then, of course, you've got the cultural differences and the linguistic differences. So there's a kind of like a whole new mini dictionary of half a dozen phrases, which I had to invent and then try out on Shen Yang and discuss with her. So, for example, the most thorny, the most difficult one was the little black children, the Xiǎohái, which of course are not black. They may be little, but they're certainly not black in the sense that we understand a black child. But they are black in the sense that they are illegal, in the sense that a hétre, an illegal taxi, is also called a black cab, which of course is completely different from our kind of black cab. So we went round and round in circles. I said, we cannot do small black child. We can't even do black child. We cannot use the word black at all because it just gives completely the wrong impression. So in the end, we ended up, I think this was the publishers came up with the idea that we should write it out in pinyin. So Heihaizi, Heihaizi. So we used Heihaizi in the text, and we translated that as either illegal kids or illegals, or excess birth children. And then, of course, there is another completely different term in Chinese for excess birth children. So, 超生儿, literally excess, 超生 birth are children. So we used like basically three terms: Heihaizi, illegals, excess birth children. The opposite of which is the 独生子女们, the only children. So I spelt that as only hyphen children. So I'm kind of inventing a mini vocabulary, especially for this book and for this situation, which is so interesting. Only one term I reused from another book, and that was the excess birth gorillas, because in a book I translated for Xinran about, what was it called?
China Witness?
No, it wasn't China Witness. It was Mother. I have to think of this. Hang on.
Gonna play the old Google here.
Yes.
Messages from an unknown Chinese mother.
Exactly. So I translated for Xinran messages from an unknown Chinese mother.
Or sorry, I should correct that. It's just message, singular.
Yeah. I translated for Xinran message from an unknown Chinese mother. And in it, there are the excess birth gorillas, who are the families or couples who simply up sticks and run from the authorities from one place to another, possibly even in some cases abandoning their baby girls on the way. So that, I mean, that's an oversimplification, but the excess birth gorillas, the 超生游击队, and guerrilla as in guerrilla warfare, not as in gorilla the monkey, was a term that I used then and I reused it in this book. But other than that, I had to completely invent these terms, and it was very good to have both the publisher and Shen Yang to discuss with me how we were going to call these kids.
That's reminded me of two things. There was an episode quite moderately far back I did with Dylan Levi King on a totally different story, a horror story, The Flock of Ba Hui, which was by a Chinese author but written in the style of H.P. Lovecraft, who was an author who had this network of other authors who sort of imitated him and used the vocabulary and to use a comic book term, what do they call it? Shared, what do they call that? Shared, anyway, a sort of a shared universe where everything interacts. And I was speculating with Dylan, if you were to translate it, then it would make sense for translators going into whatever language to have a shared translation dictionary as well for all these terms. And then it occurred to me in a couple of your translations, Nicky, I'd noticed a reoccurrence of an idea. I think it was in Happy Dreams and somewhere else. You mentioned Scout Patrol, SCOUT.
Oh, yes.
And I was like, wait a minute. So is there a shared Nicky Harman universe? Because it was two different authors, two very different stories.
Yeah.
But the I forget the Chinese original term. What is it?
I've forgotten it too, but it's the
like the sort of traffic warden-esque figures
yes,
who
that's
police
right.
the food stalls.
They've got rather more wider powers, and they can be quite oppressive. Yeah, you're right. But it's not just for me. I like to work with other translators. And if I do, I really like it when we can get together and agree on our language. And Dylan King, he and I have worked on Jiapinghua novels separately and together. And so we've always tried to use the same terms where they recur, because Jiapinghua often sets his novels in a village which he gives the same name to. Qingfeng Tun, the Fresh Wind Village. So we called it Fresh Wind Village, both in Happy Dreams and in another forthcoming novel, which is coming out in a year or so. So yeah, you're right. There should be a shared language. It's a really interesting thing, and it's a lovely thing for translators to work on together if they're getting the same terms coming up again and again.
Yeah.
That's so nice. Can I say something about Nicky's translation?
Go for it.
Yeah, I love Nicky's translation. It's really authentic, and it really 把我的声音说传递了出来. Yeah, she made me British, and I'm proud to be a British brat. I'm proud that I'm a British brat right now.
I really wanted to get your voice.
Yeah.
That was
You really
so
did
difficult.
a good job. Yeah, and there's one funny thing about her translation of when I wrote in Chinese about Liu Yangguang, my friend's haircut, is we call it in Chinese 西瓜头, the hairstyle. So when Nicky were translating, she just at first she doesn't know what is 西瓜头. So when she asked me, we had a conversation, and then she we call that pudding basin haircut. So it's really interesting.
That's one Chinese vocabulary that's very well preserved in my memory. 西瓜头, that's watermelon head, right?
Yeah. It's really cool. When you cut the 西瓜in half, and you have this fringe, so it looks like a 西瓜头. But in you call it pudding basin. That's really nice. So in China, it's watermelon. In England, it's pudding.
Yeah, pudding basin. This is so interesting because it refers back to childhood memories of food. When I was a kid, we never had 西瓜. We didn't have watermelons. But we did have puddings, and they were steamed in basins. So a pudding basin. My daughter always accused me of cutting her hair in a pudding basin haircut when she was a little girl. We weren't eating the puddings, but she still reckoned I was using the metaphorical basin to put on her head. Not
metaphorical
literally.
watermelon.
Yeah. Have you ever had a pudding basin haircut, Angus?
Well, I was going to say the term I use for this one is different again. Not as different, but I would call it a bowl cut. And I think American, I think American listeners don't use pudding in quite the same way. So I think in the States, it would be a bowl cut as well. Although the bowl is, of course, the pudding basin. They're the same thing. So they're much more connected than the Mandarin name.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And the last thing I love the most Nicky translated is the song about the grass, my childhood song. Not as fragrant as flowers, not as tall as trees. I'm a weed that nobody knows. I'm not lonely. I'm not worried. I have friends all over the world. Spring breeze, oh spring breeze, blow me green. And sunshine, oh sunshine, shine me bright. Rivers and mountains nurture me. Earth and mother hug me tight. It's so beautiful. I just love it.
Oh, but it was beautiful in the Chinese.
No, you translated so well. Spring breeze, oh, spring breeze. Really nice.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So we've more or less come to the end of my questions on the book itself. Before we go on to the miscellaneous section, is there anything else either of you want to say about the book, the story?
About the guerrilla thing, the 超生游击队 Nicky mentioned. Yeah, I would like to. Do you guys know there is a 小品? 小品, I don't know. You know, during the 中央电视台的晚会, the parties on the TV, they have this 小品 called 超生游击队. It was acted by Huang Hong and Song Dandan. Yeah, they were the couple who had excess children, and they were dodging the government. Each city they go, they name their kid, excess kid, the name of the city or the place the kid was born. It's really interesting. You should watch it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's the only thing.
Thanks for throwing it in.
Okay.
I've just remembered something I forgot to mention. I said to Nicky there was two things that you reminded me of. One was the Scout Patrol and the extended language universe. The other was about Hey Hi. This actually came up in a very different story that we covered on the podcast, a fiction story by Mo Yan. Radish is his English name. Chinese name is Poming de Hongluobo. Yep. Which is a short one. It's set in I think it's like the 50s. So it's not so long after the revolution. We're somewhere in the countryside, and there's a lot of, I don't know if it's the Great Leap Forward, but it's that sort of time. Lots of work's being done in the village, trying to modernize it, upgrade it. And there's a little boy who's doesn't really fit in with all this rushing about. And in the translation, he's just called Hey Hi, all one word, Heihaai. And the translator is Howard Goldblatt, who's pretty famous in Chinese to English translation, and it's like the English translator for Mo Yan. And he obviously, well, is it obvious? I think it's obvious. He made a choice there not to translate Hey Hi as like black boy or something that included the word black. He just kept the pinyin, which seems like the right choice there. But I didn't really have any question. I just wanted to, in case any listener was screaming into their smartphone, Angus, you've forgotten your past episode. Just interesting recurring themes that pop up when you keep reading these things.
Yeah.
So that was my little nugget I wanted to get out there before we go into the misc section. Nicky, was there anything that you wanted to throw out there? Or are we good to march on?
No, I'm good to march on.
Okay, great. So the next question, it's the word of the day. So we've got two guests. So I'm hoping we can get two words of the day. Are there any Chinese words we've not, or it could be one we've already mentioned, but any Chinese words we either have or haven't mentioned already that you'd like to nominate and maybe talk a little bit about?
Okay. I recently learned a new word I would like to share with you too. I didn't even know this word in the past 35 years. I just learned this new word this year, and it suits this book so well. I learned it from a friend. She posted on her WeChat describing a beautiful summer. And when I read it, I was like, what? I don't even know this word. Oh my God. So I checked online immediately. It's called Wei Rui. Let me send it to you guys right now. Wei Rui. Yeah, Wei Rui. Nicky, have you ever heard about Wei Rui?
No.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Okay, let me send it to you guys right now. Wei Rui.
So two quite complex characters.
Yeah. Wei Rui means 草木旺盛, a lush of the plants, 草木旺盛的意思. Yeah, 葳蕤.
Right. So like lots of plants blooming in the springtime, is that?
Yeah, 草木旺盛的样子. And also in the ancient Chinese poems, it appears. And because she was describing the summer, 草木葳蕤, the summer, to describe the scene everywhere is green. So I think this word suits the book pretty well because since I mentioned that we are like grass, I mean, the excess birth children were like grass, plants,
Right.
trees.
Right.
Yeah. So I hope all the excess children who survived, I mean, can be like the summer trees and the plants flourish, or
Yeah,
moss.
luxuriant.
Yeah,
My dictionary
luxuriant.
says luxuriant.
Yeah,
burgeoning.
yeah. It's a new
Burgeoning,
word
that's a
I
great word.
learned. Yeah, what is that word?
Burgeoning.
Burgeoning.
It's a hard one to spell. I might spell it wrong.
Yeah, weary. It's so beautiful. I
Hmm.
even want to use this for my pen name.
Oh,
Yeah, it means, yeah. So I hope we can all.
Angus,
Oh.
your spelling is
What?
horrible.
Oh dear. There's
What?
no.
Let me see.
Oh
You
dear.
got a D in there.
I'll just throw myself out the window right now.
Actually, it's perfectly correct. Just got an extra D.
Yeah.
Weary. That's a lovely word to characterize the book and the community.
It means 草木旺盛. It's so beautiful.
I've found some, not exactly key words, but a key bit of text, which are the slogans. And then they're actually they're horrible, but I hate to say it, I did have a lot of fun translating them. It's really quite fun translating slogans, like translating songs is also fun, because you can really play around with rhythms and rhymes. But in Shen Yang, it's the slogans, the wall slogans that you quote at the beginning. During the strictest years of the one-child policy, there were these horrible, vicious slogans written on the walls of all the houses. If you have children illegally, we will legally demolish your house. And the one I was particularly proud of was give the snip to poverty, coil yourself in money, which of course is a reference to two main family planning methods, giving the snip to the man or the woman and having a coil fitted. So give the snip to poverty, coil yourself in money. And then there's some other, they're pretty horrible to read, but sometimes I just do have fun translating, even if the language is quite horrible.
Yeah. Happy you had fun translating these.
Yes, yeah, because you can really let your language imagination go wild.
Yeah. Angus, you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just I had a bit of a brain fart there. So my next question is a little different from the usual format. So in past episodes, I had been asking guests if the story was a drink, what would it be? But I think that one has been drained dry. I so to speak. It's starting to get repeat answers, and I think it's a lot harder than it seems. So I thought I'd ask you to something a little different. I'd ask you if you could pair this story with any piece of music, what would it be? Or if it makes you think of a piece of music, what would that music be? Or if you were adapting this into a movie or a TV show, what music would you choose for the soundtrack? Something like that. You're as free to answer as you like. Did either of you have any ideas about this one? Yang, do you want to go first?
I don't know if you guys know about Lin Hai. He's a very famous musician in China. He has these beautiful melodies called 琵琶语. Very beautiful. I think I already typed it on Zoom. 林海琵琶语. In Japan, they have 久石让, the master who Zhu Hisaishi. Did I pronounce his name right? Yeah, but in China, we have Lin Hai. He has this beautiful melody called 琵琶语, and 琵琶is one of the ancient Chinese instruments. And it's so peaceful and mesmerizingly touching. And I mean, I used to play this song for the whole day, on, and it's soothing and calms me. I think maybe you can search it online, and on YouTube you can also find it.
Yeah, I'll link to it in the show notes for listeners to find on YouTube, and I'm sure it'll be on all the Chinese music apps as well.
And Nikki?
No, I think I can't top what you've done, what you've said, what you've suggested. I would love to hear your music. I have no special music of my own to suggest.
Okay. This one, Nikki, if you listen to it when you are translating, it will help. It's very peaceful.
Lovely.
It's very beautiful, nostalgic.
It's a lovely idea to pair a novel and the translation of it with music. It's a lovely idea.
Yeah.
I actually have two songs that are springing into my head, and they wouldn't be here if we hadn't had the word of the day about sort of wayward, burgeoning grass and greenery. There's two songs which I think are in sort of dialogue with each other. So there's a musician called Julie Christmas who brought out an album in 2010 called The Bad Wife, and she's a heavy metal musician, and some of the songs on the album are loud rock songs, but some of them are very sensitive, soulful ballads. And the second last track on the album is a cover of a country singer called Willie Nelson, and it's a very sad song that she's covered in the same sad style. And then she has another one which is kind of similar. It starts off sad and quiet, and then it sort of burgeons and blooms, and it's called When Everything Is Green. And it's kind of, I don't really know what the feeling she's trying to get across is, but it has like a bittersweet feeling that I also could see in More Than One Child.
When everything's green.
And like years later, I was listening to this musician, Tom Waits, who's got loads of albums. And it so happens he's got a song called All the World is Green.
Wow.
And if you look at the lyrics for the two songs, it seems like When Everything Is Green is like her own spin on All the World is Green.
Can you forgive me somehow? Maybe when our story's over, we'll go where it's always spring. The band is playing our song again. All the world is green.
I would probably nominate both those songs as my own song of the days for the book. Continuing with the show. So we're on to the final section now, further reading. So we already had some great recommendations of films and I think some books as well. But if there's right at the end here, if either of you would like to recommend a book for readers, it could be one, like if they like this book, then they'll like that book, or it could be just one that you want more people to read in general. Did either of you have a book that you want to mention for the listeners?
I do.
Nikki.
I do. We talked about this before you came on online, and it happens to be one that we both like. So if you like More Than One Child, you will love another story that I had great privilege. I was privileged to translate, published by one of the Random House group, called Our Story, a memoir of love and life in China by Rao Pingru, who was a gentleman who died at a great age in his mid-90s just last year. Sadly, I never met him, but he wrote beautifully about his life, which almost spanned a whole century in China, and his love for his wife and the rough times that they go through and how he cares for her at the end. And it's not often that tears come to my eyes when I'm translating, but certainly this moved me a lot. Every time I revised the last few pages, I found the tears coming to my eyes. But something that readers will really enjoy Two things, actually. One is that he taught himself to paint so that he could commemorate his life with his late wife in pictures, because all the photographs that they'd had were probably fairly few, and in any case had been destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. He recreated their whole life together in most beautiful, brightly coloured watercolors that he painted himself. And the other thing is that his descriptions of food are absolutely wonderful. There's food on every page. And I didn't need even to worry about quite how I translated this or that particular local dish, because he'd painted a lovely picture of it to go with the text. So it's Our Story, a memoir of love and life in China, by Rao Ping Ru, also translated into Italian and I think a number of other languages.
Awesome. And are you seconding that one, Yang? Are you? Is your choice the same as Nicky's?
No, yeah. But since Nicky already mentioned Our Story, I'm gonna recommend Leftover in China by Roxanne Lake,
right?
My friend who connected me with Shen Yang. Yeah. Because what she wrote is also a little bit related to one-child policy. At the beginning of the book, it says 40 years ago, China enacted the only child policy, only recently relaxed. Among many other unintended consequences, it resulted in both an enormous gender imbalance, with a predicted 20 million more men than women of marriage age by 2020, and China's first generations of only daughters. Given the resources normally reserved for boys, these girls were pushed to study, excel in college, and succeed in careers as if they were sons. And these are, when they grow up, they're all independent women. And now living in an economic powerhouse, enough of these women have decided to postpone marriage or not marry at all, to spawn a label leftover. And there's this part in the book, which I think you guys are gonna love it, that there's this man who disrespect women. Do you mind if I read this part?
Go for it.
We like our wives to be yogurts, said the 25-year-old Chinese investment banker sitting across me. Plain yogurts, so that we can flavor them as we'd like. On paper, this man, a friend of a friend who had kindly offered to provide his perspective on leftover women, is a solid match for June. Like her, he's ambitious, well-educated, works in a prestigious field, and speaks excellent English. When I sat down to talk with him at his office in the central business district of Beijing, I thought I might even play matchmaker and offer to introduce him to one of my accomplished female friends. As it turned out, however, he's surrounded by high-achieving single women at work, while he enjoys their company. He's not at all interested in marrying his educational or professional equal. Besides, he's already engaged. My fiancée is a plain yogurt, he explained to me, just 2 days before his wedding. She's low maintenance and doesn't really have her own ideas. I like her because she's easy to manage. And then, leaving me to question whether he was engaged to a human or a dairy cow, he left the office to board the high-speed train that could take him back to his hometown for his bachelor party. This is very shocking to me, as he described woman as plain yogurt. I want to spit on his face when I read that part,
I wonder how often he does that, if that's his line he uses every time.
Yeah. You know why they call leftover in China? Because those women are too excellent for those men to marry them. That's why they were leftovers. So I think it's a really interesting book, and it's also one of the phenomena after the one-child policy, because because they had better education, those one-child girls. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people from outside China who have an interest in the country may have heard the term leftover women, but they haven't always had someone to join the dots for them between the connection between that phenomenon and the cause at the start of the chain, the one-child policy. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
I have a book recommendation too.
Yeah.
It's it's not a translated Chinese book. It's not about China at all, but it is a memoir by a female writer, and it is about a rough childhood.
Oh.
And this is going to be a callback to Stephen King, because the reason I read this book was he recommends it in his own little semi-memoir on writing. He says, if you ever want to read just one of the best writers ever and a much better memoir than the one I'm writing, then you should read The Liars Club by Mary Carr. And I can't really remember all the details, but I think my elevator pitch for it would be, it's about her slightly crazy childhood, and it's a slightly crazy childhood because she had two slightly crazy but very different parents. So the parents are very present in her life, unlike in More Than One Child, but they're really vivid, sometimes difficult, often very interesting characters. And I think we can see that in some of the adults in More Than One Child as well. And a good thing about The Liars Club is that it's got a sequel. She wrote a book about being a young adult in the literary scene called Lit. And I don't know if you want to get this in the show, Yang, but you mentioned you're hoping to write a follow-up to More Than One Child. Is that right?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, actually, I think I wrote it also on my blog on my own website that I'm gonna write a sequel, also related to my husband, because he's Italian and we have cultural difference. Not only that, he's only one child, very spoiled.
Right.
I'm except for Xiǎohái, not spoiled at all, a British brat. So we have a lot going on in the past 10 years. And I think I will start from when we met, because we met each other right after I graduated from college. And I never had a boyfriend. He was my first boyfriend. I was his first girlfriend. So a lot of stuff went on in the past 10 years. So I think I'm gonna write a sequel. I hope Nicky can still be my translator.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I would be honored.
Thank you.
Awesome. That actually leads really nicely into the next question, because you mentioned your blog. It's just, if listeners want to find out more about each of you and your work, where would you send them?
The best way is on my website. It's very easy, no capitalized characters, shenyang.com. And we want to use Shen Yang, but Shen Yang is occupied, right? So shenyang.com, and there you can find links to my Twitter, Instagram, and Shen Yang /1121. 1121, why? Because it's my lunar calendar birthday. I was born on January the 1st, 1986, but the lunar calendar, it's still 1985, November the 21st. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Nicky, where would you like to send the listeners?
I would like to send them to paperrepublic.org, paper-republic.org, where I have my webpage. So if you go there and you look on the left-hand side and there's translators, you click on translators, look for me under Harman, and all my work and everything I've been doing is there. I not only work with and for Paper Republic, but I also keep my webpage there.
Awesome. And that's it. That's all. Is there anything else either of you would like to say before we bid farewell?
I like to say thank you both, Angus and Nicky. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good 2 hours. Really, really, it's really nice just to explore a topic in detail.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I changed sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, you go first.
I was going to say, I've changed the show format slightly. I'm more busy now, so I don't want the shows to go on for ages. So I cut down the questions. I made sure all the questions go on one page, but that's nice in a way. It means we are not rushing through loads of questions. We can sort of meander a little bit. If there's less questions, that's more time for the questions to breathe. So yeah, I'm glad that that turned out nicely.
You did a very good job. Thank you, Big Boss.
Thank you.
And in the end, I want to thank my husband, Gabriele Tempesta, because he was my assistant social media manager. And there's one thing he said about, because he has been supporting me for the past almost 10 years. And he said one thing, like other people invest on on stocks or real estate, but I invest on potential writer. Yeah. So I hope there are more people invest on potential writers, because Virginia Woolf said you need a room to write, and of course also income. But if you also have a very good husband, that also helps.
All right, we've come to the end of the show. That was, as always, a fantastic chat, and it was great to have a three-way conversation there with an author and a translator. Those are always really fun, and what better pair could you ask for than Shen Yang and Nicky Harman? That was a blast, and I'm not just saying that. So you probably know what's coming next if you're a long-time listener. It's the plugs. I'll just keep this one really simple, although don't I always say that? So social media, Instagram is a fun place to follow the show, at Churchific, TRCHFIC, great place to talk to me, or just see random things I happen to spot in stories. It can be quite fun too. Twitter, what can I say? That's another way to reach out to me. Sometimes I tweet stuff at Angus Likes Words. There is no show Twitter, it's just my one, Angus Likes Words. So that's that. We have a Discord you can join and chat with other listeners. Invite link is in the show notes. I guess I'll plug the Churchific map. If you want to see all, perhaps with some exceptions, all the story settings and authors' HQs, shall we say, plotted on a map, then there's a link in the show notes where you can see my own little custom Google map that tracks exactly that. I think it's very cool. Now, supporting the show, best place to do that basically is Patreon. For $1 a month or more, you get bonus shows. I try to bring these out every week or every fortnight. I am a little stuck for new material to cover, but I guess I can watch a movie or read an article or read some short stories, and then I'll be able to keep stuff queued up. But right now, certainly into early September, there's going to be an episode, I believe, every week, and there's a back catalogue of like 60 plus. So support the show, get bonus episodes, sign up to the Patreon. There you go, marketing talk for you. So the URL for that is patreon.com/churchific, but there is a support page in the show notes that has Patreon and all the other ways you can support the show financially with your lovely money. It's there in the show notes. So yeah, last thing of all, I haven't kept this very brief, unfortunately, but last thing of all is the most important thing you can do for the show, which is spreading the word, telling people, tell your friends, tell your teachers, tell your brothers, tell your sisters, if you're lucky enough to have some, and most importantly, tell your grandma as she gives you a date cake and keeps feeding you and feeding you and feeding you. And on that note, 再见.